Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pizzapia, and today it's our special edition of Between Two Matts. That's right, because I am between, of course, Matthew Friedman one ear and Matthew Harmon in the other. So we're going to be using last names only in the show today, but today is a very important program. It's all about the wide receiver rankings and the tiers. We did this last week with the running backs. This is a very important program because this is really how we do that deep dive into the position, into the player pool, the players to look for, the players to avoid. And of course, at some point in time, there will be, I assume, an Allen Robinson rant from Matthew Friedman. But Matt Harmon joins us from Yahoo. He's the creator of Reception, Perception, and of course, many other Schoolhouse Rock favorites. Matthew Harmon, is so nice to have you here on the show today, Matt. How are you doing this off season as we are approaching the season?
I'm doing good. Honestly, guys, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And, you know, the closer we get to week one, the more I'm like, man, I'm kind of ready to see the answers to the test at this point, right? Like there's been so much player movement, especially at this particular position, that I'm ready to see, Allen Robinson, how does he perform at the Rams? AJ Brown, is he actually going to get 11 billion targets in the Eagles offense, as some beat reporters have put it, because of the way it's looked in training camp? Again, I'm ready to see this play out, but we still got a little bit ways to go, and people got a lot of drafts to do between then and now. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
That's an excellent point. I kind of feel the same way. We're just kind of like, all right, like I also don't want to hyperventilate over everything. I always like to do this. I always like to go back a year ago and look at some of the 2021 buzz camp stuff going on, which is always fun. And one of my favorite things, Friedman, was I found a thing. It was like Odell Beckham Jr. and Baker Mayfield on the same page and ready to go. And I thought, wow, if that doesn't tell you everything about training camp, and maybe to take some things with a giant grain of salt, I don't know what does.
Yeah. Also, remember at that same time, Deshaun Jackson was the new shiny wide receiver for the Rams.
Right.
So, right. I mean, training camp, who knows?
Who knows? But we know what's going on with the wide receivers. We've done our homework. We're prepared for the exams, for the SATs, and any other tests that might be out there. But before we get into everything, I want to remind everybody, you've got to start preparing as well. And there's no better tool to prepare with than our fantasy football draft kit, available right now at fantasypros.com/kit. We've got the rankings from all of our analysts, the ADP, the player profiles, the position primers, everything you could possibly need to dominate your draft. And of course, most of the content is free, but if you're a premium subscriber to Fantasy Pros, you get even more as a subscriber to the draft kit. And I keep telling you, we got the special little way to do it. If you go to fantasypros.com/offers, make a deposit with one of our partner sites. It's very simple. If you're going to make a couple wagers, you're going to play some DFS, find which site works for you, make the deposit, go do that, because and I know you're going to do that anyway. So you might as well get 6 free months of premium Fantasy Pros membership. That's right, 6 months. It's going to take you all the way through the fantasy football season. You get to use all the draft tools, all the in-season tools. We just had that draft intel tool draft, which is absolutely stunning. It just dropped this week, where you can basically know all the tendencies of everyone in your home league by uploading all that. And if you're a premium member, you can mock against all of those. So talk about getting prepared for the real tests, because the drafts that you're in with your friends, your family, and your enemies, those are the real tests. We're going to get you prepared. So go check out the draft kit at fantasypros.com/kit. Go premium today at fantasypros.com/offers. The best of all the worlds. And again, for what? For playing some more fantasy football and making some wagers. You're going to do that anyway. So you might as well use all the tools we have along with it. Now, today, obviously, we're going to be using our fantasypros.com/rankings over at wide receiver, which you can check out for yourself. See all the tiers, the ECR, the ADP, and everything in between. And we're going to be using our half-point PPR system as well, or half PPR, excuse me. I know one of our people gets very upset if I say the extra point, and I don't want to get docked before the show even starts. But let's start with the ones. Let's start with the guys at the top of the board, gentlemen. So again, I'm trying to use last names so I don't confuse myself today. At the very top tier, we've got Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. So Harmon, when we're looking at this list right now, Cooper Kupp is coming off a historic season. Well, let's just put it that way. Those are typically very difficult to repeat. And also with this Stafford elbow thing, which he says is a big deal. Other people like to use the word abnormal, which doesn't make me feel very comfortable. Is Cooper Kupp still the true number one in your ranking?
Yeah, he is for right now, but I could hear an argument for Justin Jefferson being there, and I might flip him by the end of the process too. I mean, I think Jefferson's got such a good outlook this year, such a great player. I mean, he is just checks every box from an ability standpoint, and he's a true phenom at the position, I believe. So I could totally see Jefferson being one. I still got Cooper Kupp there for right now. The elbow thing is funny because part of me thinks that this has become a big story because Sean McVay is such a dramatic speaker. Like he's the one who's like, this is an abnormal thing for quarterbacks. I'm breathing easier or sleeping easier after seeing him throw. It's like, it is interesting to me that I guess this is actually something that Stafford dealt with last year, and that he's more bothered by the management plan than the pain part of the elbow thing. So I don't know. I haven't taken too much worry about the Stafford elbow situation. I've still got Kupp number one, but if you want to put Jefferson there, man, I'm not going to argue it.
Well, I do. So let's not argue. Let's stay friends here for the beginning of the show. And I keep saying that I think if at the end of the year, if I believe that Justin Jefferson is the 1-1 player, then I should take him any chance I get in the first round, regardless of position, regardless of what it is. And that's something I've been doing here on the program consistently in every show that we do. I don't know if we've talked about Cooper Kupp much, Friedman. Does the repeatability factor of what happened last year, where everything just broke right for Cooper Kupp and Stafford and that relationship, and not to say that the league is caught up. I mean, obviously, if you didn't catch up by week 4, they weren't catching up. But now they've had a lot more time to really game plan against it and really think about it and what they're going to do here. Should we be just anointing Cooper Kupp as the 1-1, or is Chase or Jefferson really the correct answer?
I think, yes, we should anoint Cooper Kupp as the 1-1, but I will say, like, I don't have much of much of an inclination to argue if you want to have Jefferson number 1. I had a tweet a couple of days ago about how if the elbow injury seems to be something that persists or, is exacerbated for some reason during training camp, I would move Jefferson to the wide receiver 1. And on the one hand, people were like, it's about time. We're like, why haven't you done it yet? And then there were the other people who were like, are you crazy? Cooper Kupp is awesome. He's going to smash again. And I guess that's just the sign of where we are in the draft season. But it's also a sign of, like, there's balance between those two, right? I think they are. I think that they are in a tier. I'd say half tier above Jamar Chase. What I like about Cooper Kupp is that he does have the continuity within that offensive system. Like, we've seen him do it before. As great as Justin Jefferson is, we haven't seen him do it in this new system. And I think the system will probably be good for him, but it's not a certainty that the system will be good for him. And, Kirk Cousins, he's a good quarterback. I don't think he's the caliber of quarterback that Matthew Stafford is. So, and I'll just say Kevin O'Connell, probably a good offensive play caller, but we know that Sean McVay definitely is a good offensive play caller. So that's why I go towards Cooper Kupp. But Justin Jefferson, a phenomenal player, like already on a Hall of Fame trajectory if he's able to continue doing what he's done previously. I don't think you could go wrong with either one as the first wide receiver.
Well, picking up what you just talked about there, Harmon, do you think that because it's a new offense and because there's a little bit of that unknown factor, and then you look at Jamar Chase, who we all have third, I believe, in our rankings, behind Jefferson, why isn't Chase number 2 then, theoretically? Because continuity is there. The relationship with Joe Burrow is already there and established for a long time. But also we know what we're getting in terms of the play calling and the coaching staff. So should that be taken into account, or is the margin between Chase and Jefferson further than people realize, or closer?
I think it's pretty close. I think that people would probably argue, Justin Jefferson's got a cleaner path to getting like a 28-30% of the Vikings passing targets than certainly Jamar Chase does. Although, Adam Thielen's still kicking around there. They're going to incorporate 11 personnel more often, more receivers on the field in Minnesota. Again, as Friedman said, it's all kind of in theory at this point, but that's the expectation. Whereas we know with the Bengals, they are going to play a ton of 11 personnel. Tyler Boyd's still going to command targets. T. Higgins is a really, really good player, and I think has an argument to be a wide receiver 1 along with Jamar Chase. So I think that would probably be the argument against it. But I think those, I kind of like how Friedman said it, that they're all in the same tier. And I also have Stefan Diggs in this tier as well, in the first tier. But I think there's a little bit of barrier between Kupp and Jefferson and Chase and Diggs just because, and I mean, honestly, you would argue that, or at least I would argue that Diggs has a cleaner path to 27% of the Bills targets than Jamar Chase does in Cincinnati. I think that's probably the one argument against Chase. I don't really care about any of the, like, the regression stuff, the per target metrics, whatever. Chase is a great player and will continue to make up the gap in other ways.
Yeah, I keep coming back to the same thing with Kupp, though, which is I see 1,947 yards, and I just feel like the expectations, I mean, if I asked you who has a better chance to get 1,600 yards this year, Cooper Kupp or Justin Jefferson, my answer is Justin Jefferson without hesitation, just because I think what last year, also the tread on the tires when you add in the playoffs as well for Cooper Kupp, that kind of worries me. With Chase, I feel like there could even be this plateau that we haven't even seen yet. I mean, it was his rookie season. I mean, I think some of us kind of forget that. It's like, what if he's better? Which is a terrifying idea for the rest of the league, but very exciting for fans.
Rookie season while also not playing college football in his final
right, and
like, that's a huge gap. So yeah,
and the whole
I agree.
The white stripe on the ball thing, which was also something last camp that everybody was really concerned about in 2021. So much for camp buzz. But those are the elite guys, and I think those three, pretty much everyone has them. We can all argue all day long about who should be the one, but at the end of the day, 3 first-round talents no matter what. Now, in terms of this next group where you were just talking here, Harmon, let's talk about Stefan Diggs is at 4 here in the ECR, then Devontae Adams, CeeDee Lamb, Deebo Samuel, Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill. So these are all established names, all very familiar. Stefan Diggs, you have as well. You're saying over the rest. So talk to me a little bit about Diggs before we dive into the other ones. Why is Diggs closer to that elite tier or that super elite tier for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've talked a lot about, I'm sure we'll talk about Gabe Davis. It's a wide receiver show and it's a fantasy podcast in the year 2022. We're definitely talking Gabe Davis, baby. So, I mean, I think that obviously we've talked a lot about his projection. Isaiah McKenzie potentially taking over the slot receiver job. Could Dawson Knox take another step? There's a lot of question marks behind Stefan Diggs in the Bills passing game. But to me, there's no question that Diggs is still an elite receiver in his own right. Has had a high target share the last 2 years, has cleared 160 targets in back-to-back years. I think there's a 0% chance that, he's outscored by somebody else in this offense. He's so locked into this great role, tethered to a pass-first offense, one of the pass-heaviest offenses in the entire NFL. And it, again, is just as good, if not better, than Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase as an individual talent. And I think he's definitely on their level at the very worst. So there's really nothing that, in my mind, at least keeps him off that tier. And if I get to the back half of the first round and Stefan Diggs is on the board, he's one of my favorite picks to make there.
All right. Now, one guy that you guys have a big discrepancy on is Mike Evans. So Mike Evans here is number 8 on the board. Harmon, you've got him at wide receiver 5, Freeman at wide receiver 12. Freeman, why have you knocked down Mike Evans almost on teetering outside of wide receiver 1 altogether?
Yeah, I just want to say I love Mike Evans. As a player, I think he belongs in the Hall of Fame. When Julio Jones was a free agent, which maybe I'm tipping my hand here, when Julio Jones was a free agent, I did have Mike Evans as the wide receiver 5. I think he's got that upside, certainly. But given the addition of Julio Jones, and then given the, I would say, accelerated path to playing time of Chris Godwin, I wasn't expecting Godwin to be healthy for the first month. And he might not really be fully healthy, but he still might be out there playing enough snaps and getting some targets. So given that those two guys could be on the field as early as week 1, Mike Evans is someone that I'm going to have just a little bit of not skepticism about, but just guardedness relative to where I was ranking him previously. I'm obviously immense upside, but just yards per target been declining a little bit the past few seasons. So I don't think he's the same Mike Evans from a few years ago. Still, 1,000-yard, double-digit touchdown upside. But I don't think he has that league winner upside that I previously projected when Godwin was going to be on the bench and Julio Jones wasn't with the team.
Well, the consistency, Harmon, of Evans is off the chart. I think people see that and they want to run to it. And I understand why. There's a safety to it. Other people point out that sometimes the game log can be a little erratic too. It's not exactly like you're getting it divided over 17 weeks necessarily all the same. And that is sometimes the knock on Mike Evans, right? Well, there's a little bit of dormant side, but you could say that about a lot of wide receivers. I think sometimes that's just the nature of the beast to a certain extent. So you see the other side of the coin with Evans. You're buying into what aspect of it? The consistency, the last ride of Tom Brady into the sunset. Why do you have Mike Evans still, higher actually than the consensus right now?
Yeah, I'm a little bit slow to adjust here because I take all of Friedman's points there, really heavily.
He is an influencer, I've heard.
Well, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Right? I mean, so I had Mike Evans really bullishly ranked, prior to all of the, changes that we've just talked about. And, I'm actually still I was on the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast with Dalton, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And I was kind of actively saying, like, I want to actually move CeeDee Lamb ahead of Mike Evans because I really want to be bullish on CeeDee Lamb. And I think, by the end of the day, I might end up doing it. So I might have Evans at wide receiver 6, and then I could kind of debate him with Devontae Adams there right after. But I do still want to put like a flag on Mike Evans this year because I think he can lead the NFL in touchdowns. We know he's going to get 1,000 yards. Like, the loss of Gronk in the red zone will certainly be huge. But the more good things we hear about Chris Godwin, although it sounds like they're not going to totally ramp him up until maybe, the middle or second half of the season. But like Friedman said, he's going to be out there most likely getting targets. Julio Jones is tough for me, man, because I do think I don't have any questions about Mike Evans declining as a player, but I definitely have questions about Julio Jones declining as a player, given what he was as an individual in Tennessee last year. But, he's still going to be out there and commanding looks. And, they got him wearing like number 85. They might have him playing like a tight end type of role.
That's what I think. When that happened, that's exactly the conversation Friedman and I have. I said, well, there's your guy down the seam. And in the red zone is Julio Jones, kind of fulfilling that Gronk possibility, which I think is probably where he should be at this stage of his career because he doesn't have the same burst that he did, 7 years ago. Are you somebody, Harmon, that ranks guys, and I do believe these are different things. Do you rank players based on what you think they are in terms of draft investment, or do you rank them based on where you think they're going to finish at the end of the year? Because I don't necessarily think those are the same thing. Do you have a certain approach as you're ranking and moving guys up?
Yeah, so for me, what I do every single summer is I go through my projections league-wide, team by team, et cetera, et cetera. That obviously gives you a result, but, you guys know this as rankers. You don't just take your projections and publish that as your rankings. You also have to move guys around based on, their range of outcomes, stuff like that. I think Evans has for example, just to kind of put this to paper here, I think Evans has a really easy, safe projection, but does have that really high ceiling in his range of outcomes, which is why I've kind of bumped him up a little bit. And then as things change, like you go back in your projections and I look at where guys were before and then where guys have moved. And then, all right, do I need to adjust this guy up or down? But, there are certain players that in your rankings, like I want, if you're using my rankings, I want you to draft this guy. So I'm going to bump him up a little bit to kind of make that signal, even if I don't necessarily think he'll finish at that point, right. At the end of the season, like you said. So it is different. The process that everybody goes through with rankings is really different and really fun to kind of kick around and talk about because not everybody does it the same way. And there's a lot of different paths that you could take on the journey to get to the same destination.
All right, let's get to the destination on the rest of these guys. Friedman, when you look at this group, and it's a star-studded group, Debo coming off a great season, Tyreek Hill in a new spot, but certainly a very exciting player, CeeDee Lamb, Adams, Diggs. Who has the best chance, do you think, to finish as wide receiver 1 overall if everything really broke right for them? Anybody from this group at all?
Yeah, I'd say the best chance is Stefan Diggs because we've pretty much seen him do it. He's the only player in the league with 160 plus targets over the past 2 seasons. But, Harmon made the great case for him. So I'll just say, Diggs is number 1. But I think pretty close after that is CeeDee Lamb, who, right. People have talked about how he's been a disappointment for the past 2 years, but he's had over 1,000 scrimmage yards in his 2 seasons in the NFL. He can play across the formation. Now with Cooper gone, with Cedric Wilson gone, he's going to be playing almost every snap. He's going to be out there for almost every target. So I think he's going to have a ton of volume coming his direction, and he's still ascending. He was just a 21-year-old rookie. He's still in that upward trajectory phase of his career. I think this is a massive breakout year for CD.
All right, reverse it. Who in this group do you think finishes outside of wide receiver 1? Because we all know every year there's a certain attrition at this group where we think, oh, these are the top 12 guys, and usually we get 7 of them coming back, or usually, maybe at best, sometimes half. So is there somebody you think that could fall out of this top 12 or top 10?
Yeah, I mean, Deebo Samuel and Tyreek Hill are the two guys who come most immediately to my mind. Both of them are going to have different quarterback situations than they had last year, so that could be a contributing factor. I think both of them are going to be in offenses that skew a little more towards the run than the offenses that they had last year. Deebo Samuel, I mean, I think that 49ers offense could still be pretty good, but Trey Lance has that strong arm. Maybe he focuses a little more on Brandon Aiyuk going down the field. Maybe Deebo Samuel isn't the guy who gets all of those, like Jimmy Garoppolo-esque type of targets near the line of scrimmage and creates a lot of yak after that. Maybe that's just not so much the offense with Trey Lance at quarterback. And Tyreek Hill, I mean, he's great. We've seen what he's been able to do, but there is a step down, obviously, from Patrick Mahomes to Tua Tagovailoa. And
really?
Yeah,
not according to Tyreek Hill.
Not according to Tyreek Hill, but I'm here to teach him something. Okay, Tagovailoa is no Mahomes, and Jaylen Waddle. I mean, I think his rookie season was a little overstated, but he did have a ton of targets coming his direction, and it's not as if all of those are going to shift over to Tyreek Hill. So those are the two guys who stand out to me as guys who are good wide receivers, very talented, but because of the circumstances around them, might underperform expectations.
All right, same question to you, Harmon. Who do you think has the upside to be number one overall in this cluster, and who do you think has the downside to finish outside wide receiver one altogether?
100% agree. It's CeeDee Lamb. You know, there's this idea that he's being ranked or drafted at his ceiling. Well, he's not, because I agree. His ceiling is wide receiver one overall this year. He has a great chance to lead the NFL in targets, given the depth chart that's around him in Dallas. And like Friedman said, he's really good. I don't care about what he produced with Amari Cooper. Like, losing a player like Amari, even I think Cooper's a little bit overrated, but moving on from a player like that, having that much, out of the offense is huge for a player like CeeDee Lamb. And then obviously you add in Michael Gallup not being 100% for week one, not even going to play week one, according to him. So the runway is just totally clear for CeeDee Lamb to smash this year. He's tethered to a good quarterback in Dak Prescott. I agree. I'm like I said, I want to bump him up to wide receiver 5 ahead of Mike Evans. I'm probably going to keep talking about it. I should probably just do it at this point. So
we're just going to call this the Harmon rankings review. I think we should just change the name of the show today. Let's just do it. Isn't ranking changes right now with Matt Harmon?
Isn't every podcast at this point like, all right, that was a good point. Let me go.
It is. And shouldn't they all be? Isn't that the point? Like, why else are we all getting together here to talk about this, if not to all challenge each other and open each other's eyes to things that maybe we have biases about that we don't realize, or maybe we should look at things a little differently and not have such tunnel vision. It's not that we shouldn't stick with our opinions and stick with the research and the homework we've done. But the whole point is getting in a room. What's the adage? If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Well, luckily, I never have that problem here, obviously. But still, I feel like that's the whole point. That's why we do this. We're trying to all get better, and we're trying to challenge each other. And I'm with you guys in terms of Lamb. And I've been a guy who's been on CeeDee Lamb for 2 years. And I think sometimes when it starts to stall out, when you're looking for that giant breakout number one overall ceiling, it doesn't happen. You start to get frustrated. It's kind of how I felt about Mike Williams the last few years. Been a Mike Williams guy, but then the injuries, the issues, bad offensive line, bad quarterback play at the end of the Philip Rivers tenure, all that stuff starts to grate on you. And it's hard to learn to love again sometimes on some of these players or see the upside. The next tier we're going to talk about, these are the guys on the borderline of wide receiver one. So the 1As, as I like to call them. This is players like T. Higgins at 10, Keenan Allen, A.J. Brown, Michael Pittman, DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin. There's a certain level of safety with some of these players, and then a certain level of leap of faith with others, I feel like. So when you're looking at this group, typically everybody has their favorite or their clear choice to say, yeah, this is a guy that I do believe is going to lock in wide receiver one potential. Harmon, when you look at this grouping here in this tier, who sticks out for you? Is it one of the guys in a new situation like AJ Brown? Is it a guy that might have a bigger path with Michael Pittman, or a guy who's safer and historically been there like Keenan Allen?
Yeah, man, I really like this tier of wide receivers for sure, because I think there's a lot of like upside with the unknown. For example, like a DJ Moore, could he take a big leap? I have him ranked a couple of spots ahead of this. Could he take a big leap with Baker Mayfield, who I don't think like, for example, with a player like Terry McLaurin, you kind of have to say through gritted teeth, like Carson Wentz is the best quarterback he's ever played with. I think Baker Mayfield is a clear cut upgrade. And even if I'm not the biggest Baker guy, I think he can help elevate DJ Moore. Michael Pittman. I mean, I love Michael Pittman, big Michael Pittman fan. And I don't think he actually, the more I've thought about it, I don't actually have a negative in not that he's a flawless player or anything like that, but like from a big glaring negative in his pros and cons list to me, because
is the only negative that he hasn't done it yet? Is that the negative?
I think it would be that like Matt Ryan is falls off a cliff, and like the Colts are dead wrong about their evaluation of Matt Ryan, and they're screaming from the hilltops how happy they are about Matt Ryan, and they threw Carson Wentz out the door with really no backup plan. So this Matt Ryan thing kind of fell in their laps. That would probably be the only negative, but I think Matt Ryan from like a passing statistic perspective was good last year. Good in a clean pocket, stuff like that. I think he'll be protected pretty well and be a good fit in the system. And Pittman, I think, is a superstar type of talent. I think he's that good. His reception perception is incredible. 96 percentile success rate versus press coverage. I think he has the talent that would warrant, like, if he had a top 5 season or something in fantasy, because Matt Ryan actually is even better than we're expecting. Like, I think that's within his range of outcomes, though I think it's unlikely he gets there. Well,
it's a huge offensive line upgrade from Atlanta to Indianapolis year over year for Matt Ryan. I don't think he's toast, and I think he has every reason to be excited about him the way you are. Friedman, who are you excited about in this tier when you look at it that you say, okay, I've got some established veterans, some guys that might be in some underwhelming offenses, but I know what I'm getting when it comes to the Moores and McLaurins? Or is there an upside play? Who is the guy for you that you want to target in this cluster?
I agree with Harmon's take on DJ Moore. I really like him, but the guy who really stands out, I just have to say AJ Brown. Like, he's super talented. I'm not going to say he's the best wide receiver in the league, but I feel like on a talented basis, top 5, this just feels like it's too late for a receiver of his caliber to be going. And I get the hesitation with it. New circumstances, maybe a really run heavy offense, a quarterback that people don't seem to trust, but Brown has 10.1 yards per target for his career. And that's including the playoffs. Like, out of players with at least 200 targets over the past 3 years, that's number 3, just behind Deebo Samuel and Justin Jefferson. Like, I think he's up there in the Jefferson tier as a talent. So even in a run heavy offense, I think Brown is going to surpass the 106 targets and that's like the career high 106 targets that he's ever had in any season. I mean, I think that number should at least be 120, but if this team skews towards more of a pass heavy state, it could be 140, or like, the fantasy gods be good, 160. If AJ Brown gets that kind of usage, I mean, people are going to lose it with how he crushes. Like, he will be, like wide receiver 1, just dunking over everybody.
Is this tier sometimes a little problematic too? Because I know when we get to this next group, we're going to start talking about the Batemans and Gabriel Davis, as spoiler alert, Harmon said earlier, and a lot of guys that we're super excited about, right? Is this the point in the draft where, outside of maybe the favorite one you want, do you fade this group altogether a little, Friedman, when you're looking at it, because you feel like you can get similar productivity from those tier jumper guys from the wide receiver 2 class?
A little bit, although I have to say I like almost everyone in this tier. Like, maybe I'm a little bit on Keenan Allen, but it's not as if like I dislike Keenan Allen and I'm not taking him or anything like that. I honestly like everyone in this group. Now, I do say that you mentioned the wide receivers coming after this. I like a lot of them too, and so I'm very happy in rounds 3 through 6 to be targeting wide receivers pretty heavily. And that means in rounds 1 through 2, maybe I want to go a little bit heavier on running back. Like, I definitely want to have 1 running back coming out of the first 2 rounds. Maybe I have 2 if the board falls right, but I'm very happy to take any of the guys in this tier if they're there at ADP or falling down the board a little bit.
Who's the most dangerous?
Let me run this by you guys, because I was thinking about this today as well, and I agree with Friedman. I pretty much like everybody in this tier. There's some guys I love more than others, obviously, naturally, but do you think maybe if you take a guy like Keenan Allen, who probably doesn't have top 5 finish or top 10, I don't know, like top 7 finish in his range of outcomes, but is a really secure bet, you're going to lock him in for this target share, you're going to lock him in for these catches. Do you think maybe that allows you to be a little more risky with the breakout potential tier, the next guy that we're talking about, maybe one of those like Rashod Batemans or something, or like a Jerry Jeudy, like a bit of a bigger swing? Or even then, like, and then if you take a guy that is really, green light everything you said about AJ Brown, who I think is that good. And I mean, my God, they're about to take Jalen Reagor's targets and hand them to AJ Brown. Like, that's going to be amazing for Jalen Hurts. Good news there. But he's probably still a little bit more volatile. Terry McLaurin also volatile because he's attached to Carson Wentz. I don't know that it almost like I'm totally cool with drafting anybody in this range, but I think the type of player I draft here will then inform maybe the next player that I take. It maybe allows me to either be more volatile or, kind of take a safer swing like a Brandon Cooks as opposed to maybe going with the Jerry Jeudy in the next tier.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is. And Friedman, I'd also say too, isn't it kind of specific to, like, most of the time these are second round players, right? We're looking at second, third. If there's a running back that let's say you like the Saquon Barkley buyback program. Let's say you like DeAndre Swift drops to you in the second round, Javonte Williams. But if the running backs run and it comes back to you and none of those guys that maybe you liked are there, this is a good investment then, right? Is that kind of where the pivot goes to, Friedman? Or are you more specific about, no, I definitely want to build with these guys and make sure I target these guys regardless of who makes it back to me?
I'm not going to push it on a running back in the second round if I don't think a guy belongs there. So if a running back I like in the second round isn't available, yeah, I'm very happy to invest in any of these wide receivers. To Hardman's point about the wide receiver, the type of wide receiver you take earlier, maybe impacting the guys that you take later. I get it, but I'm just going to say, nah. Like, I don't need an excuse to seek risk anywhere in the
draft.
That.
Yeah. I've done enough drafts with you already. He's fine with that. I mean, he's taking Julio Jones in the third round, I think right now. That's where we're at. Let's talk about DJ Moore for a second, because this is another one that's got a big gap between you guys, right? He's got an ADP of wide receiver 18, the ECR of 14. So let's talk about this, because it seems like, the public is not as enthusiastic necessarily about selecting DJ Moore, but it seems like you guys have said nice things about him. Friedman, is there something, why is it Baker Mayfield now that's going to, quote, unlock DJ Moore, end quote?
Well, I mean, I think Baker is part of it. As Harmon said, he is the best quarterback, as mind-blowing as that is, the best quarterback that DJ Moore has ever had throwing to him. I think one reason why the public isn't as high on DJ Moore as some of the analysts are is that he hasn't had the touchdowns. So the overall fantasy points, the production hasn't been there, but he's had the usage. He plays in Carolina, which is just sort of like an off-market team, so people don't really pay attention to it as much. The offense could be really bad. They have someone who's kind of a joke as a head coach, and they have a quarterback. I mean, am I putting enough dirt on them? They have a quarterback who, even though we think that Baker Mayfield has the potential to be, let's say, like average, most people, like casual fans, think that Baker Mayfield is really bad. So I can understand why your friends and family drafter isn't as high on DJ Moore as the expert consensus.
Yeah, and now Harmon can understand why my quarterly reviews with Friedman afterwards, I always need a whiskey because of some of the things that he says and the bluntness in which he gives me critiques at times about how I do this job. But Harmon, talk to me about DJ Moore, because I mean, the public's not wrong. It's not like Baker Mayfield made a lot of stars out of a lot of wide receivers in his Cleveland days.
Yeah.
Not that he had Odell, he had Jarvis Landry. I mean, these guys were okay at times, better than others at other times, worse at other times. But why all of a sudden are we saying, okay, yeah, Baker Mayfield, DJ Moore, this is the improvement level. This is where the touchdowns go up?
I think that, for one, he's not going to score 4 touchdowns every year, right? Like, at some point,
I don't know. You could have said that the last 3 years.
He's going to have 7, 8, right?
Yeah,
that's very true. Very true. Mm-hmm. I think you can project him for a really good target share. That's one thing about Carolina, is that, it's sort of billed as this is a good skill position group. I mean, not really. Like, Christian McCaffrey obviously is going to command a good target share. Robbie Anderson, I think, I don't know. I'm not always quite sure what's going on with Robbie Anderson, but
Robbie Anderson isn't very sure what's going on with Robbie Anderson. So I could he's
going back and forth on the name. So, I mean, that alone, there's that. So, and then after that, they have Terrace Marshall, who was terrible last year as a rookie. Then, they have Rashard Higgins, who, as Friedman said, the joke of a head coach, Matt Rule's getting pissed at him for, not for reaching the ball over the goal line and celebrating with his buddy Baker Mayfield. There's a chance he could just dominate targets there, just DJ Moore. So there's that part of it. And just in general, Baker Mayfield basically, he can be average and that's fine. But I understand the public's hesitation on it as well. But I do want to be a little bit bullish on DJ Moore because I think he's such a good player. And I do think the archetype of wide receiver that DJ Moore fits a little bit better with the quarterback like Baker Mayfield than a guy like Odell Beckham, who requires a bit more timing precision than Baker probably has in his game.
All right, let's move into the next group. This is the sexy group, the breakout potential guys, a lot of them in this tier. So you got Jaylen Waddle coming off a huge season last year, then Mike Williams, Courtland Sutton, Brandon Cooks, DK Metcalf, Allen Robinson, Friedman's favorite, Marquise Brown, Amari Cooper. Then again, we get to Jerry Jeudy, very popular guy, Darnell Mooney, Bateman. So you got Bateman, Mooney, Jeudy, you got Sutton, Mike Williams. These are a lot of names that people really like to talk about right now. So let's talk about the buzzy guys a little bit first. Courtland Sutton has an ECR 6 spots ahead of his ADP. Is that something, Harmon, that you think is correct? Like, should people, I guess, are the experts really being bullish on Courtland Sutton, and should people start paying more attention to that? Because so far ADP hasn't quite caught up with it.
Yeah, I get it. I think my contrarian take with this whole Denver situation is that I don't think these guys are actually as good as people think. The mainstream wisdom was, wow, Russ is getting dropped into a really great offense that's loaded with good skill position players that have been held back by this terrible quarterback. And quarterback play was definitely bad. But I also think that both Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton as individual players in their reception perception profiles were below expectation last year. I don't think either one of these guys, I wish they were both actually coming off great seasons where they looked good out there. They were separating at a really high rate. I would love that much more than the seasons they're coming off of. Like, Teddy Bridgewater is not good, or he's not a starting quarterback, but he ain't in the level of Drew Lock, or some of these other goofballs that Denver's rolled out there. So this was, it was more of they have to wear some of the blame basically for how bad and unproductive they both were last year. That being said, you can write off both of their seasons due to injury. With Jeudy especially has the high ankle sprain, and Sutton, I've noticed in reception perception that guys can be expected to lose almost 3% off their success rate versus man numbers in the first year that they're coming off an ACL. So you have to have a little, but it still takes a little bit of a leap of faith to get these guys there. And Russ is a very specific type of quarterback, getting dropped into a different offense than he's ever played in. And every Russell Wilson offense basically just becomes the Russell Wilson offense. So while I'm in on Courtland Sutton, I have him ranked at wide receiver 8 or 19. I get where the public's hesitation is, because neither one of these, there's a lot of change going on here. But I do think that Sutton's the safest bet of this group. And I think Jeudy does benefit. I know you didn't ask about Jeudy, but I think Jeudy benefits a lot from Tim Patrick being injured. I actually kind of think he needed Tim Patrick to not be there in order to be ranked here. And I had him below this before that, and it took the Patrick injury for me to bump him inside my top 30 receivers.
Okay, so now with the Patrick injury taken into effect, would you rather Friedman take Courtland Sutton where he's going, or wait around and take Jerry Jeudy instead? Is there a market difference where you say, yeah, I got to reach for the Sutton brand? It's like the Coke versus Pepsi. One of them's on sale though. So does it make a difference to you? Or are they just both cola?
At ADP, I would probably rather have Sutton than Jeudy. And I agree with Harmon's assessment, or the perspective that Jeudy, and I'd say Sutton early drafters got totally bailed out by the Tim Patrick injury, which sounds like a weird way of putting it, but I don't think those guys would have hit expectations that accompany their ADPs if not for the Tim Patrick injury. Now I think they're probably going in the accurate range. And what I prefer about Sutton is that he does have that downfield ability that we've seen previously. It's not to say Jerry Jeudy doesn't have it, but we have seen it with Sutton in the NFL, that downfield ability that I think really meshes well with Russ's inclination to throw downfield. So I prefer Sutton to Jeudy at ADP, but I think it's about the same.
Now, Darnell Mooney is ranked 5 spots ahead of his ADP, wide receiver 31. Rashod Bateman, 9 spots ahead of his ADP at wide receiver 36. These are two very trendy, buzzy names. Friedman, do you have a preference between these two guys? Do you like them both or neither?
Yeah, I mean, okay.
That was not very convincing. That did not sound like you were excited at all.
I prefer Bateman. I will say I'm a little bit of a skeptic when it comes to Mooney. who could be really good. I'll just say, like, there's a chance that Darnell Mooney dunks on me this year. I'm just skeptical. And I'll say, like, the bull case is that everyone is so enthusiastic about Allen Robinson this year, wherein Darnell Mooney, like, really outperformed him. And, like, if you're being optimistic about Mooney, you could say that he was so good that he forced the coaching staff to push Allen Robinson into a different type of role so that they could accommodate Darnell Mooney. I'm just not that optimistic about him. Like, he's a fifth rounder who is a 2-star recruit and never had 1,000 yards as an undergraduate. You know, like, I'm just skeptical that he's actually able to do it again. It makes me think of, like, Harry Douglas back in the day, who had like 1,000 yards with 132 targets, and Kendall Wright, who had a similar season, and like Brian Hartline. It's like, these guys, yeah, they had seasons where they got a whole bunch of targets coming their way because of circumstances. And maybe those circumstances conspire once again for Darnell Mooney to have 140 targets, and he looks like a number one receiver with over 1,000 yards receiving. But from my perspective, whether he gets that usage or not, he is not actually, in fact, a wide receiver one. And so I don't want to draft him as if he's that guy.
I was so close. All I needed was David Boston on my bingo card, and I would have checked all of them on that list. So close. I never win bingo. Harmon, let's go to you with the same question about Mooney and Bateman going back to back here, basically. Do you have a preference of these two guys? Do you see it like Friedman, where you're just more concerns about that Chicago offense and you would lean towards Bateman? But how do you feel about these two?
Yeah, I think these guys are a general toss-up because it's almost like you could make – they're almost like funhouse mirror versions of each other, where, you know, Mooney, I agree with Friedman, like, he's not a number one receiver. He's an ideal 3 and probably an acceptable 2. So that's fine for me there. But he's going to get a boatload of targets. Like, that situation that you said, like, will conspire, it obviously could be this year because there is just nothing on that depth chart behind him. So he might get a lot of 140 really ugly looking targets and ugly looking offense. Whereas I think Rashod Bateman is a future number one receiver. I think he can do it all. I think he can separate versus press man coverage on the outside, can beat zone coverage going over the middle, can win deep, can win contested, can win after the catch. I love Rashod Bateman, the player, but there are volume concerns in this offense because it's Baltimore. That being said, I think that he's a guy that will split maybe just over half the passing targets in Baltimore with Mark Andrews. Like, I think those guys own a 50+% share to themselves. And they'll have an efficient quarterback, most likely an efficient passing quarterback with Lamar Jackson. Maybe not quite the 2019 levels, but I think he gets back up there this year with a improved offensive line. Fingers crossed about some injury guys there. But in general, yeah, I think they're pretty close. And like I said, they're kind of funhouse mirror versions of each other. But I agree, if I'm sitting here betting on the guy that I think is a better player, it would be Rashod Bateman. For
now,
sure.
And if you'd like, as we move on here, we're going to talk about Allen Robinson because we have to. It's part of the contract. Now, if you want to know Friedman's thoughts about Allen Robinson, you got to go back to the JJ Zachariason pod from 2 weeks ago because there's a good 20-minute segment in there. That's very clear. Harmon, you've got him at wide receiver 18. Friedman's got him at wide receiver 30. ADP is going at 27, a little closer to Friedman's side. So what is it that, again, I keep giving everybody a chance to counter the Friedman Allen Robinson narrative. So I'd love to hear your take on Robinson this year, because some people very high, some people obviously not so much.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you followed reception for reception for a while, you know that Allen Robinson's a favorite of the series. Now, I think that for Robinson, to think he's going to fail in this situation, you have to think he's like absolutely washed because the situation is that good. I don't think he's absolutely washed. Back in 2019, 2020, he was like a 96, 97th percentile separator versus press man coverage and reception perception. Not quite there last year, but was still at like the 81st percentile in success rate versus man coverage. So a small step back, but also I think the situation was absolutely terrible last year. Like kind of everything that can go wrong will go wrong type of situation with COVID, injuries, his contract situation, Matt Nagy being a donkey. I mean, even for Darnell Mooney, like it was basically all slants and curls in that offense last year with the Chicago Bears. And that doesn't fit either guy. And it doesn't fit the quarterback that they had either. So I'm kind of just willing to throw out everything from the Bears offense last year with Robinson, with Mooney, and even with Fields to a certain degree, although Fields was terrible last year. I mean, obviously in a bad environment, but was just another bad quarterback in a long line of bad quarterbacks. So I think as an individual player, Allen Robinson 100% still has it. Showed last year when you watch him in isolation that he does still have it. And then the situation for the Rams is great. You know, he's walking into a good target share with their across from Cooper Kupp and with an efficient quarterback in Matthew Stafford. I think the situation rocks. Robinson's still a good player. And, you know, I'd love for you guys and your viewers to trust my evaluations on wide receivers, but I also think you can have a really high degree of confidence in the Rams evaluation for pro level wide receivers. They nailed the Robert Woods signing when they got clowned for that contract back in the day. They traded for Brandon Cooks at the exact right time to help them go on a Super Bowl run in 2018. Right. And then there were questions about Beckham. Was he washed up last year? And they do not get to the Super Bowl without Odell Beckham last year. And, you know, he was on his way to being the most important part of that game plan. And, you know, guys like Cooper Kupp have even confirmed that in interviews in the offseason that he was the main figure of that game plan. So, and even Sammy Watkins scored like 8 touchdowns as this team's X receiver at one point. So they've pretty consistently nailed these pro level evaluations. And I think they've nailed this one with Robinson too.
All right, Friedman, was that enough for you to move him from 30 to 29?
No, but I don't disagree with anything that Harmon said. Matt, my question is about the cost, the ADP. And so I want to ask you this because I do think that out of everyone who evaluates film, like you're up there. And so when you say something like Allen Robinson was a good technician last year, like he was able to do what he needed to do as a route runner, I trust you. My question is, if he hits, right, if he outperforms ADP, do you think he does it it's like such a way that you kind of have to draft him where he is versus what his floor might be, where if he underperforms ADP, given what we saw last year, if he underperforms ADP, do you think the floor just absolutely falls out? So I guess maybe phrased differently, do you think he's priced closer to his ceiling than to his floor?
I think he's priced pretty close to his floor from an ADP perspective, because I just don't see a situation where he does, unless he gets hurt, which, by the way, is totally within the range of outcomes, right? He struggled with injury. Like last year, I think a big part of why he, you know, wasn't a huge part of the game plan at certain times was because he was dealing with injuries. So,
right,
you know, that's definitely something to,
and
that's the one, and he's older, right? And we all, hey, listen, we're all getting older, fellas.
Hey, man, I popped a hamstring in my kid's football practice this week. I mean, don't talk to me about old right now. I'm wearing a brace and everything. It's terrible.
Bro, the right knee and the right shoulder are just shot. I mean, like I don't actually have a current injury, but I'm definitely like, I should probably see a physical therapist. But that's not the point. Allen Robinson going to have access to great medical care with the Los Angeles Rams. But yeah, I think that's really the only way the floor bottoms out is if he gets hurt, because, you know, Robert Woods was averaging 100, like pacing for 130 targets this year. And last year. And I think Robinson's a better player than Robert Woods. So I don't see any reason why he doesn't walk into that role. And then there's certainly a ceiling case there if he catches a bunch of touchdowns, which is, you know, that's the role I think they're kind of looking for with him, and the role that they had with Odell Beckham last year. So I think the ceiling is there. The floor is only scary if he gets hurt to me. So, but I'm with you that I don't want to push Robinson too high. I have him at wide receiver 18. I feel like that's kind of a fair, like, hey, I want you to draft him at or above ADP, but you know, I know other people that have him like top 15, and I think that's pretty aggressive. So I don't know.
All right, let's move to the other tier. Before we do, real quick, look at the list here that we just looked at, this breakout group here, tier 4. Who's the most overrated player? Just give me the name, Friedman. Who's the most overrated player in this group?
Do you have to ask me? It's Allen,
but not named Allen Robinson. Let's be different for the sake of different.
Not named Allen Robinson. I will say Amari Cooper. Like, there's a lot of ways in which that could go poorly. All right,
most overrated guy in this group, Harmon.
That was going to be my answer as well, was Amari Cooper. And I think it's probably like I think it's the easiest one to make, and for a lot of different reasons, obviously with the quarterback situation. I would also say I'm a little lower than consensus on Jaylen Waddle, just because I have a tough time seeing how, unless everybody else in this offense is a total non-factor as a pass catcher, which, by the way, Mike Gesicki probably not going to be a big factor in this offense. So maybe that's how it happens. But I have a tough time seeing how two receivers are top, fringe top 15 guys on a Tua offense. Is, Friedman buried him earlier, and I agree with that. On an offense is probably going to skew run heavy. So I need to kind of like either bump Tyreek Hill or Jaylen Waddle below consensus rankings. And so far I've bumped Waddle down, although I hate that because I do really like the player.
All right, let's try this again. Without analysis, give me the name. Who is somebody that is underrated in this tier?
Oh, right.
Matthew Harmon.
I forgot I was not supposed to.
That's
say
okay.
all the words.
It's okay. You failed. It's going down on the test here. They get to. Honestly, we've got so many other guys I want to get to and talk about. I know everybody wants to hear you talk about, but I do think this tier is interesting enough that just want to hit that note on it real quick. So, who is underrated here for you, Harmon?
I'll say Allen Robinson then.
All right, just a tweak. Friedman, who is underrated in this group?
Underrated in this group. Brandon Cooks.
See, I say Mike Williams. I've got him as a top 10 guy. I think this is the year.
I like Mike Williams a lot too. Super underrated, but Brandon Cooks, I think it's the consistency factor and the fact that he's so unsexy that they don't want to draft him.
All right. Let's move on to the sleepers here. This is tier 5. There's a lot of names in this, so I'm not really gonna, read them all off. But let's just start with Chris Godwin, whose value seems to be all over the place. It's really tough. I'm struggling to figure out where to rank or what to do with Chris Godwin. Friedman, what does your instinct tell you right now in terms of the investment in fantasy football? Do you see him as a clear wide receiver 3 that it's a good investment right now? Do you think he has the upside? Or are you worried about the injury? Where do you stand with Godwin's evaluation?
I'm fading him. And it's not like I think this guy sucks. It's just, I think if he ends up outperforming ADP, it won't be by much. So it's not as if I will be materially injured by not having drafted him. I think there's a ton of risk, a ton of downside. We don't know if he's going to be healthy for week 1. Even if he is, I'm skeptical he's going to be fully efficient after the ACL tear. And even if he is back to his, old self, he still has Julio Jones there who could still target. So I'm fading.
I love this group because it has so many names to me that I feel like are really good returns on investment that all have a lot of ceilings. A lot of the trendy names, Gabriel Davis. We have obviously Drake London's in this group, Alan Lazard, who seems to have a lot of targets potentially ahead of him, Elijah Moore, who had some incredible performances last year. When you're looking at some of those names, which one stands out to you, Harmon, that you say, yeah, this one or this one is the guy that I want to make sure that I target, and I'll even be aggressive on if I have to make sure I get him on my roster?
God, I mean, I could rattle off like 10 names in this group.
Right.
This is
So what does that say about this group? Does this say that maybe that earlier conversation we had about, save Keenan Allen maybe isn't the way to go? Maybe that is where you make sure you do solidify running back a little bit and then pound this grouping here a little bit harder in terms of which names you want to get on your rosters because there's so many good ones?
Yeah, I have, depending on the backs that are there in round 2, and I'm a little out of sorts because I've done a lot of super flex drafts lately, so it's always kind of hard to
never apologize for doing too many super flex.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I have enjoyed locking in like 2 running backs, especially if you can get like a guy like Aaron Jones in the second round, and then plucking a few players from this tier because there's a great mix of ceiling and floor here. Now, if I have to pick a couple names, like I've drafted a lot of Juju this year. I think for the first time in human history, I'm really ahead of consensus on Juju. And Brandon Aiyuk, I love drafting Brandon Aiyuk in this range. Friedman talked about Deebo Samuel potentially falling out of the top 10 earlier. And I think a big part of it is I do believe in the Brandon Aiyuk ascension. You basically just take out what happened in weeks 1 through 8 last year. And Brandon Aiyuk was the guy that was you drafted him to be last year. And we know the situation that's the thing about, there's sort of this discussion, and Dalton and I just talked about it on the podcast. Like I mentioned, there's this discussion that Deebo Samuel's role in weeks 1 through 8, like that's the role that we wanted to have because his expected points were higher than when he was as like a rushing receiver hybrid. That situation that happened in weeks 1 through 8 ain't never happening again, with Brandon Aiyuk. And I don't think he's going back in the doghouse. So good player. I think that can take another step here. Could Aiyuk? Dalton is like, he says it's like 50-50 between these two guys in terms of who could be better in fantasy. I don't know if I'm quite that strong, but I do think there's a chance that Aiyuk is the best receiver on the 49ers roster this year because I'm really that high on him as an individual player.
Lots of names in this group have big upside here, Friedman. Who are the guys that you're targeting in this group that you feel really confident? What are the names?
2 pretty obvious names, Gabriel Davis and Drake London. Gabriel Davis, I mean, we saw what he did in the playoffs, but for his career, including the playoffs, he's had 9.9 yards per target that's a really high number. We know the touchdown capability that he has, 12.1% touchdown rate for his career. He's got the size, 6'2", a beefed up 227 pounds now. He was a 21-year-old rookie, which means he's just 23 years old now. So he's still ascending, and he's got a great quarterback who can support multiple fantasy relevant weapons. And then Drake London, rookies, they can sometimes be inconsistent, but this is the kind of rookie receiver I want. He's big. He's got the draft capital. He's young. He's productive in college. I mean, I think he's got the attributes to be like the next Mike Evans. So if I'm a year early in drafting him, that's fine. I want to take the shot.
Do you worry about Mariota holding him back and that offensive line holding the offense back completely?
It's the worst offense in the league. There are lots of reasons to be worried about the Falcons. So yeah,
well, that's the whole thing. It's, I guess in PPR, you like him, right? Because you say, all right, the volume is just there. The volume's there. Even if it's crappy volume, it doesn't matter. It'll accumulate into points. But when you start to worry about half where the touchdowns matter more, does London take a hit then for you?
I'm still going to be interested in him because even if it's inefficient volume, I think it will result in the touchdowns and the yards. So that's what I'm focused on more. But the volume is king. I think that's going to be coming his direction because there's nobody there. Like, name another Falcons wide receiver. It's almost
Brian
impossible.
Edwards.
Brian Edwards, baby.
I just wanted to name one.
You cheated.
Was just accepting the challenge. I didn't cheat. I didn't even look at a depth chart. I didn't have to. Very excited about him. Cordero Patterson. I can name two. Haha. All right.
Auden Tate. Just look at Ian Hart's Twitter feed.
Yeah.
Auden Tate's on their roster.
These guys are not wide receivers. It's a trick.
Fair enough. Michael Thomas is in this tier as well. Harmon. This was once upon a time, a few years ago, the 1-1 player, arguably in fantasy football. He looks pretty good so far. I've been making some, I would say, selective investments. I just took him in flex this weekend as my third wide receiver because I figure, hey, if he's my third guy, I can get some reliable fourth guys. I want the upside in that wide receiver 3 spot. Are you buying back in slowly to Michael Thomas? And then when do you stop buying in where it gets a little bit too high if things are going too well that you start to get a little worried?
I don't know that he can get up to a range where I'd be too worried about it because I think he doesn't have the 2019 season in his range of outcomes, I don't think, in this offense. Not because of Drew Brees. Like, I think that sort of in the same way that folks think like Deontay Johnson's only a little like pop gun receiver because he was playing with the ghost of Ben Roethlisberger. I kind of think the same thing about Drew Brees and Michael Thomas. Like, people think he can only run slants because Drew Brees can only throw slant routes. I am actually kind of excited to see Michael Thomas and Jameis Winston sort of try to mesh together because it's just stylistically really interesting. I'm totally okay taking the plunge in this range, but I think there's definitely a wide range of outcomes with Thomas. Not because, like, if you could guarantee me that he's going to be on the field for 17 games and be, I don't know, 85% of the player he has been in his peak, because I think he was a really good player at his peak, then I think that there's, no shot that he outright fails at a wide receiver 30 cost, but that would be stupid to assume that Michael Thomas is going to be on the field for 17 games for, one reason or another. So I think that kind of answers the question. That I think there's a wide range, but I don't know that he's ever going to get to a point. I don't think the public will ever trust him to a point where it's too pricey for me.
Friedman, where are you at with Michael Thomas right now?
Yeah, I'm invested. Love the upside. Of course, there's downside based on the health, but I'm very invested in him. I have him ranked highly.
All right, let's move on here to the next question on the list here, because we've got a whole other group here at tier 6, including DeAndre Hopkins at 42, which I still feel is too high. Do you guys agree? Or have people not had that realization that he's not going to play for almost half of the regular season already? Not to mention all the injuries he had last year. Is this appropriate for Hopkins, Friedman, or do you think he should be knocked further down?
Okay, so in the rankings, I have him generally right here. That said, I don't have any Hopkins. I'm not going out of my way. So then why do you have him ranked there? To draft, because
that's hypocritical.
Oh, I don't think so. Because
that's also hypocritical.
No, because there could be other guys based on the rankings of other players and their ADPs that you end up drafting instead of Hopkins because they're available and they're on the board. So I don't think that Hopkins is drastically mispriced, but I think he's probably priced a little bit closer to his ceiling than to his floor. His floor is really low.
All right. There's a lot of rookies in this group too. We got Chris Olave, we got Sky Moore, one of my favorites, Treylon Burks, Garrett Wilson, Kadarius Toney. You can almost consider kind of a rookie too because he only played a couple games. Harmon, when you're looking at some of the young players here in this grouping in the 50 range, who stands out to you the most that you want to acquire?
Yeah, I'm a little bit ahead of consensus on both Kadarius Toney and Chris Olave. Kadarius Toney, I think, is a really good, a developing player, kind of on the player archetype that I want to buy into. These guys that beat zone coverage at a really good rate, can be moved around the formation. I know he's not going to play in this slot. That's going to be Wan'Dale Robinson's role, but I think he will be off the line a ton as the flanker receiver, and sort of like Robert Woods to Cooper Kupp in LA. Cooper Kupp still saw a ton of targets. Robert Woods still saw a ton of targets against zone coverage, against linebackers and safeties, despite the fact that Cooper Kupp was the primary slot. I think Kadarius Toney can be utilized in that role, and like all the risk is basically priced in at wide receiver 45. Like who cares if he flames out at 45 or Daniel Jones stinks, which is totally possible. And I like Chris Olave, who I think has a pro ready game. Best receiver against press man coverage and reception perception among the prospects last year, and I do think he walks into a pretty good target share, like Michael Thomas or not, on that offense.
Friedman, do you agree with those two names too, Olave and Toney?
Yeah, I like those. Also like Treylon Burks, target opportunities, first round capital, big body, decent enough athleticism, college production in the SEC. I think a lot of reasons to be optimistic about Burks.
All right, this group also has a ton of boring old veteran guys. We're talking about Kenny Golladay. We're talking about Robert Woods, Landry. Well, it's true. I mean, this is the tier where it's all, what do you have left in the tank, or guys who haven't done anything yet. So it's kind of the show me group, as I would call it. So with Parker, Gallup, Landry, Golladay, any of these, old veterans, do you think come at a value here, Friedman, for you, or are you staying away from them?
I'm staying away.
Okay. How about you, Harmon? Any of these names in this grouping here where you say, yeah, I'm going to, one more time, ride off into the sunset with this guy?
I think there's a decent chance, and the industry's kind of hedging as well, with the 43-44 ranking here for Burks and Woods. I think there's a decent chance that Woods is the best receiver in Tennessee by a decent gap, but I'm kind of with Friedman. Like, who cares? I mean, what are you really gonna kick with any of these guys? I'm not that excited either.
All right, last question here before we hit our mailbag and then head out for the day. Who are the guys outside of these top 60? Like, I know for me, I got a lot of KJ Osborne on rosters. Romeo Doubs has become a guy that people have really started to talk about. Is there somebody, Harmon, that you were like, yep, this is my late wide receiver that sits in my queue and I just take him for free every time?
Nico Collins. Take him at the end of the draft every single time. Big Nico Collins fan. I mean, he was, just from a cost-adjusted standpoint, let me be clear about that. I think there's some poor man's T. Higgins-ish type of signals in his rookie year reception perception. He's, I think, pretty much going to moonwalk into 100 targets in this Texans offense. And he's one guy that I'm not crazy about, but I've got him ranked at wide receiver 51 just to signal like, hey, if he's available in your queue, like you said, take him in the late rounds, because I think there's a chance he's got a little bit of upside if Davis Mills is decent. And honestly, Davis Mills from a rookie passing perspective was decent last year.
Friedman, how about for you outside this top 60? Who are some of those free wide receivers or names that people should know in deeper leagues?
I think he's still going outside of the top 60 or just right in that range. Have you guys ever heard of Julio Jones? Like, I hate to say it. It's so stupid. It's so stupid, but he's like, for me, the opposite of Allen Robinson in terms of like how I'm approaching them. Like, if Allen Robinson were as cheap as Julio Jones were, I would want him everywhere. Right. And that's how I feel about Julio. Like, I know he's got the injury issues that I'm not dismissing that at all. But when he's been on the field, he's had 10.4 yards per target over the past 2 seasons. That's number 4 across that time. Like, that is still an elite number. And when a guy normally declines, like, he's got the injury issues, but you normally also see the decline in efficiency. And we just haven't seen that same decline in efficiency that we normally see with other guys. So I am still on board with Julio. I know he's fragile, so maybe he plays only 4 games, maybe 8 games. If that's the case, I look totally stupid, but that's kind of baked into his ADP at this point. So I'm going to take the shot on a guy who's like, last we saw, still playing like a Hall of Famer when he has a healthy hamstring.
All right, there you go. Same kind of investment, but one is much cheaper than the other. Let's move on to the listener mailbag, and this is straight from our Discord, which you can join for free at fantasypros.com/chat. And of course, when you're a premium member, guess what? You get access to the AMAs and the stages and all that fun stuff we do there too. So once again, membership has its privileges there. This is from Clady, or Cleedy, I believe. Who would you guys keep in the season out of these 4 players? Leonard Fournette, Pittman, Waddle, or Akers? Now, guys, if this is a situation where I can keep somebody forever, I imagine we're going to lean towards one of these wide receivers here. I don't want to step out of bounds. Friedman, do you favor one of these wide receivers as the keeper in this group, or are you just trying to win now with a Fournette or Akers?
No, I'm with you. Assuming that you can keep these guys multiple years, Pittman is the guy that I'm looking at here.
All right. So is it Pittman over Waddle for you as well, Harmon?
Yeah, same goes for me here. I would go Pittman over Waddle if that's the case.
All right. What if Waddle had a better quarterback? Would that change your tune?
I mean, that would be
get
nice.
one next year.
Well, the Dolphins no longer have 2 first-round picks, which I actually think was interesting, right? When they had Tua, it was, they got 2 firsts. If Tua is just mediocre next year, they have a really easy way to immediately upgrade, or it'd be a rookie passer most likely, unless there's like a disgruntled Russ type of veteran next year, which who knows? The NFL's crazy now, that might happen. But yeah, I think that sure, it'd honestly be great if both of these guys had a better long-term quarterback situation, because I think with Matt Ryan, like, you're probably getting him for this year, and I'm hoping next year. I'm hoping the Colts don't have to do this damn dance again at quarterback again next year. But that's it. Then after that, we're back in quarterback wilderness theoretically with the Colts, and I think the Dolphins are squarely in quarterback wilderness right now too.
All right, Cleddy, thanks for the question. And again, go check out our Discord at fantasypros.com/chat. Go check out our draft kit, now available at fantasypros.com/kit. It is free. But of course, when you upgrade to the premium product at Fantasy Pros, which you can at fantasypros.com/offers, check out the offers, make a small deposit. Then you get 6 months for free of the premium features. You get access to the complete draft kit. You get access to all of the draft tools, draft intelligence, the cheat sheet creator, the draft assistant with sync, and then, of course, all the My Playbook tools in season to manage all of your rosters. Imagine you play in 5 leagues, 10 leagues, all in different sites. You could set all your lineups just from Fantasy Pros from the app all at one time. That's pretty spectacular. That's game-changing. That's time-saving. That's what you want. So go check it out. All of this is available at Fantasy Pros. Again, I want to thank Matt Harmon. You can follow him on the Twitter machine at MattHarmon_BYB. And of course, check out all of his fantastic work over at Yahoo Fantasy. We appreciate his time today. That'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Matthew Friedman, for Matthew Harmon, for Matthew Pizzapia. Oh, wait, no, that's not a person. I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.